when we're talking about race and ethnicity and what is Latinidad and who are Latinos, I just want to contextualize that because Latinos are the only people, and I know Melinna and I have talked about this, and we don't agree 100% on this, and that's okay. I think it's okay for us to disagree on things, which is that the reason, and I think a lot of people won't agree with me actually, but I'll just say it anyways, which is that Latinos are the only people in this country that, at least in the census, and that census is much broader, but that we're the only people that are considered an ethnicity and not a race, right? And race is a social construct. Race, in the 1930s, there were 26 different races that people could choose from. So race is constantly changing, and the definition of what race is. It's constructed by the people who want to define us, not really constructed by us that are being defined. And so we're the only people that are considered an ethnicity. And what is an ethnicity by current definitions? Is a culture and it's a heritage that is distinct from the American culture. And so Latinos, no matter how long we have been here, no matter how many decades and centuries, and no matter if we were, if we never even moved, if it was the border that moved and all of a sudden we were Mexicans living in America, we are the only people that are considered an ethnicity. And I think that is very purposeful because it makes us perpetual foreigners. Forever, we're foreigners because we are a different ethnicity than what the American consciousness and culture is. And it was the Immigration and Naturalization Services, INS, which was, the precursor to ICE and to the Department of Homeland Security. It was DHS, along with the Census Bureau, that decided that Latinos should be considered an ethnicity and not a race. And I understand, the many layers of why being considered a race is problematic, because it could and it would erase Indigenous and Black. But I'm wondering whether within sort of like, if you look at like the census, and hopefully people have filled out the census, and if you haven't, go fill out the census because it's important. Within the census, when you have Asian as a race, you have Asian, and then you have Cambodian, Vietnamese, Chinese. So you have a bunch within the Asian race. You have a bunch of different boxes, so that not everybody's just Asian, right? Within Asian, there's different cultures as well. So I'm wondering whether there's a similar thing that we can do for Latinos, because not being considered a race actually has a lot of implications. So when Gata, when you were asking who is those Latinas that we're talking about in the wage gap, to be honest, we don't know, and more than likely it's just whoever self-identified as Latina, right? So it's very possible that that within those Latinas we have white Latinas, we have Latinas like me. I don't even know what to call myself because I'm Mexican, but and I took a DNA test, 75% indigenous, but I didn't grow up with an indigenous upbringing. So I would be hard pressed to say I'm indigenous because I did not grow up like that. And I think it would be wrong for me to call myself that. But so it's just people who self-identify as being Latina. And so it's very confusing. And I bring all this up when we talk about ICE and police, policing and immigration are just two sides of the same coin, of the exact same coin. And there's a real intersection when it comes to laws, like, for example, SB 4 in Texas and SB 1070 in Arizona, which made it possible for police to stop someone simply because they look like they may have committed a crime, and to be able to ask them for their immigration status. And who do we think is going to get pulled over and asked for their immigration status if not people that look like us on this call, right?
Right.
And then there's a funnel between police and ICE. When people get sent to there's been stories, and many stories of people who have been sent to detention centers because they got pulled over for a traffic violation, and they end up deported. And so, these things are very, very interconnected. There's a lot of intersectionality. I don't want to hog up all the time, so I'll send it back to you. But all that to say that there's a lot to be explored and to be talked about. And I am hopeful that, and I just, I'm always maybe very naive in my hopefulness, but I am very hopeful that in having these conversations, we can actually get to a better place and create solutions. Because if we're not having these conversations and we're just sitting in our own heads thinking about this, then yeah, we're never going to come to solutions. So even if some of these conversations are uncomfortable, and it's important to have them, and I think the more that we have them, the more we learn from each other, and can change the way we think. Like, none of us have answers, and so thank you for having this conversation.
No, I appreciate it.
I'd love to respond to some of the stuff that you brought up. So I guess I want to start first with, why are we putting the census as the starting point to unpack and to really sift through the identities that fall under the Latinx umbrella. And even if we're going to talk about the point that you brought up about us being considered an ethnicity, so there's actually two questions. If you choose and I'll just speak about my own. So Mexican Chicano was an option, and there's ethnicities listed, and then it goes to race.
Yeah.
I also want to speak to the fact that when you see the bracket for whiteness, it lists multiple European countries and also Egypt and Lebanon. My partner is an Arab man, a very proud Arab man from Lebanon. Julissa knows him. He does not identify. I haven't met any Arabs. I know that there are, because there's always some folks that are colonized within different groups. But I think the census is inherently flawed. And if we start examining and defining and kind of using how our inclusion into an already problematic system as the guiding force, as our impetus at the entry point to define our identity, then I think that's problematic, because I don't think that change happens from the top down. If we're asking them to identify, hold on, let me finish. If we're asking them to agree on certain terms, then that's a distraction also from the work that's being done on the ground. And two, I think there's another episode to even talk about how to unpack what are those federal funds used for and how they're allocated. Obviously, we see that police and sheriff and any sort of extension of the carceral state, and I'm going to throw in the military too, is overly funded. So that's something else to unpack. But I want to say, like, I wanted to really bring this up really quickly, because I want to kind of ask folks to join me in this extended learning and deepening our learning, because in addition to the folks that are doing this work on the ground who are organizers, there are academics and social scientists and who approach this type of work around race and our relation to the carceral state and our interfacing with the police state and the police systems. And these are academics of color who have conducted this research. So before we got on the call, I was looking at this amazing hour-long lecture with 4 professors and researchers out of UCLA who are Black and brown. It's called LatinX Communities, Race, and the Criminal Justice System. You can just look for it on YouTube. And one of the things that they talked about, there was this professor named Matt Barreto. He's a UCLA professor. He's Boricua. He conducted this broad study. This is based on just like months and months of research and an extensive survey that he developed as a social scientist with PEARLDEF, which is the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. So they asked, it's about Latinx communities and race in the criminal justice system.